we always ask about what's going on with the business of mask making every year. And in 2021, we are looking more forward, including the effects of COVID, could be negative, could be positive, right? In the case of semiconductor manufacturing. But as of July, when the survey was taken, it seemed like the luminaries were a lot more positive about 2021 on the right than they were last year about 2020. And so, Chris, as a mask maker, what do you think? Do you think? Do you agree with this finding? Do you think it's going to be looking good going forward, or and what do you think about the delta that happened since the July timeframe? So, do you think that's going to have a negative effect in this?
Yeah, I think in 2020, looking at this, there was probably a lot of apprehension. It was still relatively early in what the impact would be of the pandemic on the electronics industry. And as you know, masks generally follow the IC industry, maybe 1.5%, 2% of sales. It's been running that way for quite some time. So masks generally are going to follow the IC industry. But I think the optimism in the 2021 survey is well justified. There's a tremendous uptick in mask units and also ASP, probably for the first time since I've been working in masks, maybe 20 years. Prices are going up in masks, not necessarily only at the high end, but in mainstream nodes, mid-range nodes. And that's kind of a supply-demand issue for sure. The mask industry is supply constrained. So I think that is kind of giving people a lot more confidence to name these sort of up numbers. The other thing we're seeing on the mask side is more node migration in the mid-range nodes. So, for us, the real story in masks in 2021 and partially 20 is the strength in mid-range and the lack of capacity to serve that strength. So that's where we're seeing the biggest demand, the biggest upticks. So yeah, I think this is justified and it makes sense to us from a demand perspective. As far as Delta having a negative impact, to the extent it impacts consumer demand and that sort of stuff, that hurts, but at one time GDP and ICs were very heavily correlated, 90, 95% we saw. If GDP was good, ICs went up. That's kind of broke down with COVID and the pandemic. So everybody knows GDP was negative last year globally, but IC was up about 8, 9%. GDP should recover this year, 4 or 5%. The IC industry should be up about 20% or more. So that correlation is not as strong. So, to the extent Delta impacts global GDP in a negative way, maybe 1 to 2% negative, we don't see that having a correspondingly large impact on the semiconductor and hence mask supply chain. We're still pretty optimistic. If it goes longer than a year, that's a different story. But for the next 12 months, this looks pretty solid to us.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. Mikael, how are you seeing it from the supplier side?
Yeah, I think we also indeed enjoying quite good times, and we experience a really positive momentum now, driven by the I think current strong market that we see, but also there is a lot of very strong long-term forecast that we see. So we forecast it will be a strong market for several years, and we experience that our customer have really identified several business opportunities that new modern writers and other equipment can enable. So from our side, we see, I think, investments being driven by mainly 3 reasons. So either is that if you have a capacity expansion on the leading edge side, but also as Chris alluded to, we see a good interest for adding capacity on the more mature nodes also. So there is a good business opportunities also there. But at the third reason, we see also that our customer take advantage of the good market to make investment and then modernize the mask writer fleets. So yeah, for sure we also experience a a good market now.
So you're seeing
good
a
market
good
sentiment
mood out there. Now, what about the FPD side? Mycronic, in addition to having restarted the Photomask laser writing business a couple of years ago, and you've always been the mask maker for the FPD, flat panel displays, right? And how is the business on that side?
I think on the FPD side, it is a little bit different story, because there during 2020, actually the photomask market for display took a kind of large hit, especially in the second half of the year, and the main reason for that was that the pandemic with work from home and the general kind of screen updates for entertainment and looking on Netflix and whatever you did at your home office or at the evenings, put a large demand on displays, and that created a shortage on the market. So that encouraged the suppliers, I would say naturally, to produce the models that they already developed. So they spent less time on developing new display models and did less R&D. So that hit the FPD market last year's. But now we actually see that the market and the demand is on the path to recover back to high healthy levels again. So, and also we know that there is long-term trend towards higher display quality, larger TV sizes, and also the display is for sure growing, has a growing importance to be a product differentiator. So based on that, I think that the long-term positive outlook is positive, but the market dynamic on the FPD side was a little bit different compared to the semicon side, I would say. But
yeah, so that's great. So basically, leading edge and mid-range, like Chris was saying, and also for flat panel displays, things are generally looking up. So it's not surprising that the next slide, which is not from the Luminary survey, it's from from SEMI, and shows pretty optimistic look for photomask sales. And to the left of these bars, we've been kind of stuck around $3 billion for the longest time, and then it started to break up onto the right, and it's looking pretty strong going forward. So overall, like the three of you, well, what do you think about $4.8 billion in 2022 is what SEMI is saying. So Mikael, what do you think? Would you take over, under, or about the same?
Yeah, I personally think there is a lot of investment going into the industry, and we see all markets picking up, and also Europe. So and also, as Chris mentioned, the pricing also on the mature nodes seems to be quite firm or even going up. So I think that will help to beat it, and it's a little bit abnormal behavior as it has been historically. So I think that will help beating the forecast.
Yeah, in every segment, right? Yeah, Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, as I'm looking at this, I think as a percent of IC revenue, photomasks are not really going up much, right? It's about 1%. So if you look at this, 2020 ICs were 400 billion, maybe it went up a little bit. We used to run about almost 2% of IC revenue in photomask. And so if some of the projections are correct, ICs hit 500 billion in 2021, that'd be about a 25% increase. The percent the industry is willing to spend on photomasks is actually shrinking from that view. So the top line's going up, but we are not getting an increased part of the share. I mean, that's one thing I would conclude from this, the relative growth of photomask versus IC. But with that said, I think, there's a pretty good chance, I agree with Mikael, to exceed this number. There are capacity constraints, so that's limiting the amount of output, but ASPs are up. So that's helping. The mid-range is quite strong. AMAT had interesting earnings. 50% of their equipment spend was in mid-range. I mean, I haven't seen that from AMAT in a long time. They expect that to double. So they gave a very bullish report on equipment spend in the mid-range. So that's a really healthy trend for masks because ASPs are good. The masks tend to come out faster. They're a little easier to make. So, I think with those things, we can beat this. So I'm going to say a little bit over is probably a pretty good guess. And the other thing I guess I'd bring up here is, we've been talking about it at Photronics anyway for a while, the notion of differentiation through design or the resurgence of the ASIC model. That's for sure coming back. I mean, FPGA took a whack out of that 10, 12 years ago. I think that has passed. And we are seeing a lot more effort to differentiate through design, not hunting for just the killer app, but very, very broad use of ICs and more application-specific use of them. If you look at the top 10 categories, I think 7 of the fastest growth were either special purpose logic or application-specific logic. So that feeds a lot of mask units. And if you combine that with mid-range node migration, I'm hoping we can get to a point where masks start to outgrow semiconductor or claw back part of the spend that many other segments of the industry have enjoyed, because we've been shrinking as a percent of the total.
Thanks. Tom, what do you think? Over or under?
Well, I mean, for me, working a lot with the advanced customers, certainly see that the new scanners and like we talked about, the curvilinear and new multi-beam mask writers, a lot of that is certainly coming and growing. And I can imagine that there's going to be a lot of capital outlay there, and that maybe there will be a larger slice for Photomask to make sure to be able to use those machines well. But that may be coming in some future years. It's still arriving, and I'm not sure how much of that gets accounted for in 2021. But maybe if there's a lot of PPP money or something sitting around waiting to be used, we'll see it get spent this year.
Okay, sounds good.